Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Lineup Lab. We are 4 weeks into the NFL season, and that is actually really helpful in terms of making long-term predictions about what offenses are going to look like, who's going to be getting the targets, who's going to be getting the red zone targets. We can actually make some pretty solid predictions at this point instead of working off one or two games and just trying to make educated guesses if someone getting 12 targets is just luck or for show, or if it's something that's real. So I've noticed a few things for a few teams so far this season that I want to share with you. I'm going to use NFLSavant.com to look at passing targets and red zone targets. I'm going to use Football Outsiders to look at snap counts, both our free tools, and then obviously our NFL Sportsbook projections, also free. So let's just get right into it. The first team that I want to talk about is the Denver Broncos. And so I think that the normal perception here is Demaryius Thomas is the number one receiver in Denver and Emmanuel Sanders is the number two receiver. But through 4 weeks, that actually really has not been the case. And it seems like Emmanuel Sanders has actually been the number one wide receiver. In terms of snap counts, he's actually out-snapped Demaryius Thomas. He gets about 85% of snaps, while Thomas only gets 77%. And then in terms of passing targets, Emmanuel Sanders actually gets 30% of the targets, which is a really huge number. Anything over 25% is usually a number one wide receiver. For example, Jordy Nelson on the Packers, I think, gets about 27%. So Sanders is getting a huge target share here. Thomas is as well. He gets about 25%. But, and maybe you're thinking, oh, well, Demaryius Thomas is going to get more red zone targets. He's a bigger receiver. Also has not been true. Sanders is actually out targeting Thomas to almost 2-1. And if we're thinking about, well, maybe Paxton Lynch isn't going to throw to him as much, Sanders actually had 11 out of, I think, 24 targets when Lynch came in last game, and Thomas only got 6. So there's really no reason for me to think that Sanders is not actually the number one receiver on this offense. And if we look at DraftKings, where we look at receiver prices, you see that Demaryius is 6,900 and Sanders is 6,800. And so again, Thomas is still priced slightly higher than Sanders, but I actually think that doesn't make that much sense. And I think Sanders is probably slightly underpriced, especially in this matchup. If we go to FanDuel, it's even more ridiculous. I think Demaryius Thomas is 7,700, and Emmanuel Sanders is a bargain, a huge bargain at 7,100. This seems like a really solid FanDuel play. So now moving on to another offense with two star wide receivers is we have the Houston Texans. And so DeAndre Hopkins obviously had an amazing season last season. And obviously he's a very good player, but it seems like with this guy, Will Fuller, this young, talented rookie, that this offense actually is changing a bit. So in terms of snap count, Hopkins does out-snap Fuller, it looks like. Hopkins gets about 98% through 4 weeks. Fuller 87%. But if we look at passing targets, Fuller is actually getting 24%, while DeAndre Hopkins is only getting 22%. If we look at red zone targets, Fuller actually and Hopkins are actually splitting targets. So, I don't think Fuller is going to be a better fantasy wide receiver than Hopkins going forward, even though in week 4, Fuller did perform way better than Hopkins. But I do think that Hopkins and Fuller are going to be closer than people think. I think Hopkins is definitely going to be better. And I think Fuller definitely takes away from Hopkins because this team really had no one to throw to. So if we look on, DraftKings, Hopkins is 7,700. Fuller is only 5,800. Then on FanDuel, we have Hopkins is 8,200. And Fuller is 7,200. So it seems like DraftKings still has probably too big of a discrepancy here and probably has Hopkins a little overpriced. So even in a matchup versus Minnesota, I think he possibly could be in play, especially since Hopkins is probably going to get the really good corner in Xavier Rhodes, who's really tall. So maybe not the best matchup for Fuller this week, but I do expect that this Hopkins-Fuller thing, that Fuller is going to be pretty close to Hopkins moving forward. And I forgot about doing this, but if we're just looking at the pass point share tool. So one thing about going back to Denver is Sanders has 30% target share in Denver's passing offense, which isn't that great. If, for example, someone had 30% target share in Green Bay's offense, we were projected to score 28 points this week, that'd be a huge deal. But Denver in general doesn't have that strong of passing offense. That being said, they host Atlanta, who's a really bad defense, and they're projected to score 26 points. They're projected to have a pass point share of 16.38, so I think this is a fantastic spot for Sanders. But if we look at Houston, for example, they're only projected to score 17 points, so this is a really good spot for either of those players. So make sure to, when you're looking at these things, you're looking at also how often is the team going to pass, what's their pass percentage, and what's their pass point share, because if someone's getting a lot of market share but not going to score a lot, that's going to influence how good of a play someone is. And that's actually a perfect sequitur into our next play, who is Terrell Pryor. So one thing you might have noticed in the Millionaire Maker last weekend was Pryor was actually 33% owned. And a lot of people might be like, why did that make sense? Why did everyone go with Pryor? Pretty bizarre. And you probably saw him in a lot of good players' lineups. And I think it was for good reason. Cleveland was only projected to score 18 points. But if you look at snaps, Pryor's getting 92%. So that's number one wide receiver snaps. Quite good. And then if we look at passing targets, and by the way, this doesn't even count Corey Coleman being out. So Corey Coleman is taking some of these targets. Pryor has almost 30% of the Browns' target share. And there's a site called RotoViz I really like, and that it had this article about air targets, or air yards, basically. It's basically targets over average depth of targets, so how far the ball's being thrown down to the field to this receiver. And Terrell Pryor's air yards are just completely absurd, and especially his market share of his team's air yards. So this guy is both getting thrown to down the field, getting thrown to a lot, and actually seems like a pretty damn good player. Now, again, if we look at Cleveland's matchup, they're versus the Patriots. They're only projected to score 18 points and have an 11.56 pass share. That being said, the spread's huge, so we expect them to pass 65% of the time, which is not bad. They are at home, and Pryor is still just not really that high priced at $5,800 on DraftKings and probably $7,200 on FanDuel. So I think he's going to be off a lot of people's radars in week 5, but I think that he actually is in play, and I really don't think they're going to abandon this Terrell Pryor playing quarterback thing, especially in the red zone. So I think he has some sneaky upside, and is definitely someone who will be on my radar basically for the rest of the season. The last person I want to get to really quick is Robert Woods, the wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. So Sammy Watkins has not played since week 2, and ever since he went down, Woods has actually gotten a massive amount of the target share. I did the calculations here, and I got 29% over the last 2 weeks. That's massive for Woods. So if we look at his just snap counts in week 4, just because we want to just look at 1 week, because we don't want to count games where Watkins has played, he's getting number 1 wide receiver snaps as well. So we have someone getting, almost 30% target share for Bills' offense. He's dirt cheap, like $3,900 against the LA Rams. Again, and on FanDuel only $5,300. So he's dirt cheap on both sides. They're facing the Rams, okay? They're only projected to score 18 points. That's not great. But this is a Rams team that's really strong up front and not as strong in their secondary. So this seems like actually a decent matchup for Woods. And again, Woods is getting the same target share as a guy like Emmanuel Sanders or Jordy Nelson or number one wide receivers like that. Or not Antonio Brown, but like almost that much target share. Now, he's not that skilled of a player, but he's going to probably get 6 or 7 catches. That's already 7 DraftKings points. And if we look at his last 2 games, he is getting that yardage. And he hasn't scored a touchdown. I don't see a reason why he could not score a touchdown. He's really, really well priced. And so I think someone who's getting this amount of target share over a 2-week sample is someone who you definitely want to be playing in week 5. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Oh, one thing I actually wanted to give as a bonus. NSL Savant is a site I really, really like. And they actually have this tool here where you can look at a lot of things, but what I used is I basically went to formation, looked at no huddle shotgun and no huddle. So basically I just want to see, well, what teams are playing no huddle often? And some of these surprised me. San Francisco obviously doesn't surprise me. They run Chip Kelly's super fast offense, but New York running almost 50% of plays in no huddle, and Detroit's actually playing 40% of plays in no huddle. And what that means is, I think both the Giants and Detroit offenses are going to be a little better than last year because they're running more no huddle, especially Detroit because they played pretty slow last year. And also the teams that are opposing them are going to get in more plays. So if we look at this, we look at some matchups here. We have the Giants are facing Green Bay, and the Giants run a lot of no huddle. So Green Bay, especially that passing game, could be really good here. Obviously, Jordy Nelson is a great play. And then Philly versus Detroit. Philadelphia actually plays really slowly. Detroit has been playing really quickly, though, and their defense has been terrible. I would not sleep on this Philadelphia passing game, especially a guy like Jordan Matthews, who does get a lot of the target share. And then, obviously, San Francisco versus Arizona. Arizona, I really like David Johnson here, especially with Drew Stanton starting. So you definitely want to consider guys who are playing against fast offenses in these games. So again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and the like button, and look for more of my videos throughout the week. Good luck making your lineups. Thanks, guys.